God called us to the mission field early on in our married life as a couple. We we felt that we wanted to be a part of building Christ's kingdom globally and overseas. So we talked about it quite often and felt that this was the way to go. And we both felt very much supported by each other in that call. And we wanted to be able to share Christ internationally. We wanted to see churches planted internationally, and we wanted to go to places where people were not going. Well, we had already worked, this will come up a little bit later, as far as expectations about going to the mission field. We'd already worked in the province of Quebec in French Canada, and I was there for almost 15 years. So we understood what another culture was all about. However, when we went to Africa, things were much different. We had the language, that was not a problem, but we did have expectations were very much the same. It was actually better than what we were doing in Quebec because we had a team to work with.
My biggest culture shock actually was when we were in France. We've done 3 fields. We started in Quebec with French-speaking Canada, and then we went to the south of France for 2 years to do seminary and be involved in a church plant situation, and then we went to Africa. So for me, my most difficult culture shock was actually France, which seems kind of funny. You'd think France is so, fancy and fun to go to. But that was my hardest adjustment. And I think it was just because I had already learned French in Quebec. So my expectation was that I wasn't going to have a culture shock. I thought I had just done the adjustment because I thought Quebec was a French culture, but I had never been to Europe. So was totally unprepared for how different a European worldview and mindset and practices are. So that was my biggest culture shock, was I think maybe being overconfident, thinking I had it in the bag, and getting there and realizing, oh, this is a different animal altogether. So that was my biggest one.
Our first assignment was in the province of Quebec, Canada, and we went up as student ministers with Campus Crusade for Christ. And after a few years, we transitioned over, worked with M&A, and went into church planting. Then after that, we left. Well, during that time, we left to go to France to do my theological education. And during that time, as we were in France, we were involved in a church plant in the south of France. And after that, went back to Quebec, and then spent a few years there doing more church planting. And then after that, went to Senegal. And that's when we started with MTW. How did God use the people of Senegal to teach us about ourselves? Well, for me, first of all, and then I'll let you say something, I understood the whole notion of relationship and hospitality in a way that I had never learned in the US or even in Canada. It was a time where I would watch them and I would see them and how much they also listened much before they would say anything. And I realized that was a really, really good thing. And I learned to listen more and say less. But essentially it was the relationships and the sense of hospitality that I felt were really transforming for me.
The people of Senegal just were very easy to love. I appreciated in them, and I think this is where I learned about myself. I think they reminded me more of my Southern culture, because in my Southern culture, we laugh a lot. And there's just a lot of this idea, I grew up with just feeling a sense of camaraderie and a good humor, and that was just part of, my Southern culture. And the Senegalese were so much like that. One of my favorite pictures that one of our dogs ate, unfortunately, so I don't have it anymore, but I just think this picture captured it the most. I went to this market and there was this lady, her name was Madame Jup, And she and I had become friends. And this in this picture, you could just see we're just swinging our arms to shake each other's hands, and you can just tell from our physical, just how relaxed and comfortable and friendly. And I feel like that was the thing that I learned from Senegal and also taught me is that I do better when I can feel like I'm having a relationship and a friendship and a comfortable camaraderie with people.
My life mission, and probably ours together, would be to proclaim Christ, especially in places where he has not been heard, but also to see churches planted, because we just really are very strong on the whole notion of the church and how important that is. But also, and I started this when I was in Senegal, to be able to train new workers for the gospel ministry and for church planting. So I think those three things, proclaiming Christ, seeing churches planted, and training others.
I think for me, our life mission and service to me ended up just being the French speaking world. Like, I don't think we kind of realized that, but we started out in the French. And then when we ended up having the opportunity to go get trained in in France, to go back to Quebec originally. And we just realized that God seemed to have put us in this direction of the French-speaking world. And, that was just a whole learning experience of, like, going back to what we said about Europe, and, what formed the French mind, and, even just learning the language and how does language relate to the way that you think. And I just feel like for me, the verse is just, lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world, because we've been all over the place. And I think it's just been very striking to me that now that we're back in Georgia's probably the biggest, contrast to that is no matter where I've gone, God's with me. We're still part of the kingdom work because God's kingdom is everywhere. And it doesn't matter what phase of life we're in or what level of service we're in, we're all in the mission for the kingdom. The thing God uses always to surprise and change my direction is sitting right here. But, I do think that he used us in each other's life as surprises, really, because, I first felt called to Africa, and then Jeff and I went to Africa in student work, and that's where we met each other. And then we ended up in Quebec because that was where he was already ministering. And I remember climbing a hill of snow and thinking, this is not Africa. And then one of the principles we even learned on the field is that if one of the other of us felt called differently or started to, even struggled with a field, like I struggled in Quebec more because I was more isolated, that we would let God use that rather than feeling resentful toward each other, that we would be open to realizing that was how God was working. So I feel like his interventions and his direction have largely been through him in my life, putting me on the right path.
And I would say also, as far as surprises or divine interventions occurring in my life, it was the same thing about going to Africa. I think Misha was very much, she had an influence in my life when I was in Quebec. And going to Africa was a very defining moment for me personally. I loved being in Quebec. I loved being in France. But I really felt that I needed to be a part of seeing what the majority world was like and being involved with people that were extremely different from me and from the Western mindset. And I think God really intervened to have me really accept that transition.
And I will add in that another surprise in that part, which was kind of fun, was we were planning to go to France from Quebec. He kind of realized he had taken the church as far as he could go in his gifting and needed to turn it over to somebody else. And so we thought it was logical to go back to France. And one of our directors with MTW called and said, we know that you feel called to France, but this is the French-speaking world, but we are beginning to open up works in fringe Muslim countries, and we would like you to consider going to Africa. And so that was definitely a surprise, unexpected. that MTW presented to us, and then ended up being a really significant ministries for us. Well, as far as the kids go, that's a whole book right there. I read an article one time by a missionary kid who said, for instance, that he had struggled with depression, and the very cause of his depression was this transient lifestyle, and yet he never would have traded it for anything else. He loved his story and appreciated his story, and I think that's probably a good overview for missionary kids, because missionary kids don't really have a sense of rootedness. They don't know where they belong. For example, my adult children have never been able to go back to Senegal. So it's like that's where they grew up, but they can't go back and visit their hometown. But at the same time, because of their third culture upbringing, they're they adapt and they interact with people from all these different cultures just very easily, very naturally. It feels natural. I don't think they feel different from that many people. So it's been a very interesting experience. As kids, they seemed pretty fine because, when you're young, your family is your world. But as adults, it's interesting to me to watch the effects that it's had. But they all appreciate their backstory, but they also are always working through who they are and where they're from and where they belong, even as adults. And that's just going to be part of their story for the rest of their life. We had a couple who basically was a mentor couple to us. And then I'll answer this one because unfortunately we lost, the husband died unexpectedly in 2001. But we had a pastoral family. They're the ones who brought us into the Reformed faith. They're the ones who mentored us as pastors. She, in particular for me, was just very instrumental and continues to be. That's what is really fun for me is she lost her husband, what was that, 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. And she and I have worked together in training. We went and were trained together to do this language acquisition program that we use, and which has been a real blessing because I got to keep her in my life. And so I have this woman, Nancy Craig, who's a Canadian who was a missionary herself, who then was a pastor's wife, who's been a widow, who's just continued to serve and been such an example and a source of richness for me spiritually and emotionally. And I really appreciate her influence and continued influence in my life.
Yeah, and as far as who mentored me, that would have been her husband, David. I knew actually David before Mission knew Nancy. Mm-hmm. And he was, these were people from Quebec City that we knew during our time in Quebec, in the province of Quebec. He was a wonderful man. He helped me get straightened out theologically, and also was just a real zealot for the church. And they even came over to visit us several times when we were in Senegal. Unfortunately, we lost him, but we have kept the connection with Nancy.
I think that the world has changed so significantly and was because we were out of the country for 20 years and then came back to the States. I don't know if I noticed the change until I came to the States and then kind of could recognize maybe where I had been in the other cultures. But I think for me, the way that I look at this is when we met in Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, I found this book called Zaire, A Midday in Missions. And they used this book to explain missions as like a human development analogy of, infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and how missions was in that. And I think that that's probably how it's affected us in missions, is the world has changed in, recognizing the value of the nationals in the countries, that that they should be more autonomous, have more of a say. And so we've watched in missions going from more of a dependency model where we were the missionaries who would come over to help, to us becoming more facilitators and support to the nationals to be the ones who are actually the leaders, whereas you used to would have had an American pastor of an African church. We were always now, we left African pastors. And I think that's where the world was changing, and that was the effect in missions that was exciting. But what you learned is every time you're there, it's new, because you can't go on what the previous generation's experience was, because the world was changing. And so you were a pioneer in learning how to do these things well, because you didn't have the guidebook. You were having to figure it out as you were going along.
Yeah, as far as the world changing, what I would say also, agreeing totally with what Misha said, is that as the world did change and that we became more partners and sometimes working under nationals, that it was good for us to learn that, because it was good for us to learn humility, to be able to empower other people, to give the advantage to people whose country we were a guest in. So we saw that more and more as we were overseas, and even now we see that. As far as the absolute truth, one of the things that I have learned throughout all this time is the faithfulness of God. We've had some really great high moments. We've had some really low moments, some really dark nights of the soul. And yet God has been so faithful, and God has just protected us and given us safety in times when we struggled. Not just struggled, but we had a bit persecuted when we were over in Senegal, and it was a time where we really saw God's faithfulness.
I think also the absolute that I feel like I learned through this whole cross-cultural experience, and even being back in the States with all the cultural stuff, I think that the absolute truth I'm starting to understand more and more is that we need to understand the culture of the kingdom, because it's very easy to pit human cultures against each other, or even enjoy the different cultures, or have to learn to adapt to the different cultures. But what is the culture of the church? What is the culture of the New Jerusalem? What is the culture of the kingdom? And I think the absolute truth is that we're all being formed for, God's culture, not our individuals. Our individuals have worth and value. They're part of his creation. But I think when we, are in the consummation of all things, we're going to see how those cultures were actually, like everything else, expressions of God's truth that we needed to be learning. So I just think that that's an exciting challenge for me now.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yes, we would go back over there now. Yeah. We'd have to worry about some health issues. We're not getting any younger, as you know, but we would do it again. It was the most defining thing that we've ever done, besides coming to Christ and getting married.
Having kids.
And having kids, right.
Yeah, I mean, how they always say that when you go on a missions project, you go to help others, but you're the one who's changed. I mean, what we've learned about God and his world through meeting all these different people in these different cultures is just irreplaceable. I mean, we would do it again. I hope I'd do it better with a little more wisdom than I went over there not knowing some of the times. But yeah, we would definitely do it again, and are very grateful that the Lord allowed us to be on this path.
We keep thinking right now, what are we going to do next? Well, first of all, I'm not going to retire from MTW right away. I'm going to keep working for a while, just because we have seen so much need right now in the development of our workers and of our national partners. And so I'm going to keep going there for a while. We've thought about other things. We've thought about having even taking some short-term trips and being being a help to some of the teams overseas if we could, even if it's just for a month long or something like that, maybe some teaching. But we want to continue to be involved in ministry wherever we are.
Well, and for me, I was able to get involved in a lot of French work here, and so my next plan is to go. There are some French programs in the public schools, which is a huge mission field, as we all know. Plus, our local library is doing a French program to try to support those. And I know we have a lot of Africans, Haitians. And so I am looking to see how to try to network with those French-speaking communities, and in particular the African communities here. And also I'm going to go help out a homeschool group, teach French in the afternoons. So I think that's kind of fun to learn, to maybe help young little bitty kids learn how to speak French. But I'm looking to, and also I want to just have more time to be involved in my church, and really go to women's Bible studies and get involved in the community. And we have a big Nigerian population in our church, so I'd like to learn more with them. But I'm hoping to figure out how to network with the French-speaking African community here a little more significantly.
First Presbyterian was one of the biggest impetuses to us to going, but not just going, but to pursuing and feeling that we were going to be encouraged along the way. You're one of our first supporting churches. Second of all, we really believe that there was just a caring attitude that you always had. And this is what I always say, and Sandy, I've told you this many times, but your communication is excellent. And the communication, we get so much communication from you, and we love it. We love every minute of it. So I think that that's been very, very helpful to us. And at times even saying, what are your needs? And things like that. What would you say?
Well, I came in to, when this all happened for us, I was a mom of 4 young kids, and then we had another one later. And so First Pres Chattanooga has been like home. You guys, from the first time I stepped in, we were visiting all these churches and everyone, we're making all this change in our life, and I'm totally exhausted from being a young mom. And every time I came to First Pres Chattanooga, I just felt like I was with my family. You guys just always made me feel like I belonged. You were supportive, you were welcoming, it was very natural. You helped where I needed help. You just made me feel a part of a family, which I needed because we were all over the place. So, First Pres Chattanooga was like, if not one of the top, just most encouraging, supportive, really just emotionally just loving us, that churches that we had. I really can't find the words to say it. It has been phenomenal the way that you took us in.
And I would also say the whole emphasis, your emphasis on missions.
Yeah.
We're going, this is a long time, 28 years, has not changed or wavered. And that's not always the case, but we're really happy and very glad that your commitment to missions and seeing the nations reached and having that bigger mindset, that has been very encouraging to us.